you by the ACRL Instruction Sections Management and Leadership Committee. I'm Amanda Folk. I'm a member of the Instruction Section Management and Leadership Committee, and I'll be co-moderating this discussion with my committee colleague, Dolores Carlito. First, I'll cover a few logistical details. This session is being recorded, and when we have the link, we will send it out widely. We will begin with a 30 to 40-minute presentation. Ask your questions using the chat box either along the way or during the formal Q&A portion after the presentation. Dolores and I will be monitoring the chat box for these questions, and we'll make sure that, that Amanda answers any of the questions that you may ask along the way, and make sure that we flag those. And at the end, Dolores will read some of your questions aloud to the presenter for the Q&A portion. And Alois, if you can hear me, could you please start the recording? Great, thank you, Alois. I'm very happy to introduce Amanda McDonald, the High Impact Practices Librarian at Virginia Tech. Amanda's developed today's presentation with her colleague Stephanie Metco, the Director of Teaching and Learning Engagement at Virginia Tech Libraries. Stephanie had originally planned to join us today, but unfortunately will not be able to attend. And so Amanda will be taking the lead on the presentation today. So there may be some questions that Amanda's not able to answer that maybe Stephanie would be able to answer. Hopefully we'll be able to get the answers to those questions. And again, you may share those in the chat box, and we will be making sure that we flag them for Amanda at the end. And Amanda, once you're ready, please feel free to jump right in. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction. So when I started working at Virginia Tech University Libraries, I was working under the title Teaching and Learning Engagement Librarian. That position allowed me a lot of flexibility to explore and grow as a librarian. And I'll be stepping into a new role in May known as High Impact Practices Librarian, which is what I have listed here. This transition is especially important, I think, for today's presentation, because I hope to bring you full circle by illustrating how curriculum mapping programs like this one can lead to the need and creation of new roles that were discovered only from the data generated through curriculum mapping. So thank you very much for joining me, and we will get started with creating the big picture, improving instruction programming through curriculum mapping. Okay, so today I'm going to share with you our 2-year-long journey of curriculum mapping that begins with the English curriculum and ends with a re-envisioning of the program. I will begin by providing context of our institution and move from locating funding for an initiative like this to the development and the launch of a pilot program through generating visualizations that can be used to communicate results to decision makers and developing a liaison training program that can sustain the initiative. So starting with understanding your institutional context, I would like to share with you the current state of our instruction landscape here at Virginia Tech. We are a public land-grant institution that currently serves students in both Blacksburg and various other extended campus locations throughout Virginia and online. Like many of our other universities, Virginia Tech is undergoing rapid changes. In 2014, we welcomed a new president, followed by a new provost shortly after that in 2015. Together, they launched a new set of visioning documents to the university, which is now formally known as Beyond Boundaries. While we are continuing to move forward with this new vision and associated initiatives, we welcomed a new interim provost in the fall of 2017. And with this change came an increased focus on experiential learning as a model for wide-scale changes in both curricular and co-curricular programming. So thinking about high-profile campus initiatives, with that Beyond Boundaries vision in mind, we're really planning for a future of Virginia Tech, not 5 years from now or 10 years from now, not even 20 years from now, but we're planning what Virginia Tech will look like in the year 2047. Part of this visioning, we are undergoing a major revision to our general education curriculum. The new gen ed is called Pathways to General Education, and it's designed to produce what our leadership is calling a VT-shaped experience. So I have that visual on the right side of your screen so you can kind of see what I'm talking about there. with the goal of each student having some type of life-changing or culminating experience while here at Virginia Tech. Many of these experiences take the form of various high-impact practices. So we're thinking of things like first-year experience or living learning communities. Additionally, this graphic emphasizes the importance of students that graduate with transdisciplinary knowledge and technology literacy, while also we want them to have disciplinary depth of knowledge in their chosen fields. This was emphasized within the library's role at Virginia Tech when we are charged with leading a new digital literacy program that would address technological literacy in various domains. So we're thinking here about data literacy, media literacy, information literacy. The V-shaped part of that diagram emphasizes a push towards informal communal learning, as well as guided experiential learning. Two areas where the library has been identified as key partners going forward. In order to achieve transdisciplinary and technological literacy, the provost has specifically charged the libraries with leading two key initiatives campus-wide. These initiatives are the ePortfolio program and the Digital Literacy Initiative. So this is a very early graphic that was released to campus leadership teams within the libraries as well as across campus. So it was pretty widely distributed. I chose this graphic to illustrate just how messy and how complicated it can be to work in the middle of a major university or major revisioning campaign for a university like Virginia Tech. But also to offer the idea that a process like curriculum mapping can help to unravel some of the overlapping ideas that we're seeing here in this graphic. For example, the two primary outcomes that the provost has charged all of the colleagues with is student and faculty success. So if you look at the center of that, you'll see two blue ovals. That's where we're talking about student and faculty success. Each college and administrative unit will need to produce metrics to demonstrate how they're addressing these primary outcomes. In the smaller green circles, so if you look at the bottom of that oval, the provost has laid out 5 secondary outcomes that we'll also need to align our programs and services with. Corresponding metrics. Personal development, workforce development, knowledge creation, economic development, and embedded societal impact are all secondary outcomes that very closely align with our own initiative in the library. But trying to figure out where and when they connect to our instructional programs is really quite challenging. So now that we've kind of looked at the institutional context, I want to move forward to thinking about curriculum mapping. And for starters, what is curriculum mapping? So when I started thinking about curriculum mapping, I did a lot of research looking really for basic definitions. It's something that would give me a foundation to kind of think about and really govern my work here. So examples of curriculum mapping to exploring like various contexts in which I thought curriculum mapping was being done really well was helpful for me. So for the initial launch into the program, I really liked what was written by the University of Hawaii at Manoa. I liked it for 2 reasons. One, it was very concise, but also it's super easy to find online. So kind of thinking about how we think about it, well, you often go to Google first. So this is something that I think is very accessible. So here's how they define curriculum mapping. They are saying that as a method to align instruction with desired goals and program outcomes. So thinking about a map or a matrix that will document what is taught and when it is taught, reveal gaps in the curriculum, and help design an assessment plan. One other thing that it also does that I think is commonly discussed is that it helps reveal redundancies. So redundancies in particular are really important for library instruction programming. In my department, for example, we handle foundational instruction. So sometimes the line becomes really fuzzy on what do we cover in freshman composition classes versus maybe a first year experience class. We don't want students to think that whatever they see in the library once and then they see it again is all that library instruction is. And we also don't want them to be exposed only to the same skills and experiences, because then they might not only be bored, but again, make this conception that like, oh, this is the only way that librarians can help me. So what we really want to do is we want to have the opportunity to build on each experience that a student has in the library, especially in instruction. And that's really what leads us to think about why libraries should curriculum map. So why libraries curriculum map is something that I've been thinking about for a couple of years. So when I first started curriculum mapping, I was actually working at a different university. I was working at Louisiana State University as a QEP librarian. For them, thinking about the QEP, which for those of you who might not know, a QEP is a quality enhancement plan, and it works with universities. So every university that goes through the accreditation process through SACS, the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools Commission on Colleges, will actually have to complete this plan. And so as that QEP librarian, my focus was really thinking about curriculum mapping as a way to align new information literacy outcomes that were found in that QEP plan to the curriculum that existed already on campus. When I was there at LSU, I worked pretty heavily with the liaisons in that department. And one of the things that we did is invite Barbara Tierney from the University of Central Florida to come and also teach us about her process of curriculum mapping. So in addition to looking at that definition, a lot of what I started with when I entered this curriculum mapping conversation really came from that education that I received from Barbara Tierney. So when we think about purposes and goals for curriculum mapping, the first one is really to identify library engagement opportunities that would support new initiatives. We also do it to identify areas within our current information literacy program that could be updated to reflect the needs of a VT-shaped learning experience, including digital and information literacies programming. And for us, it's also to identify areas within our teaching and learning program that were redundant or that could be transitioned to a flipped or an online format. So now we're going to start talking about our curriculum mapping process here. So I told you a little bit about LSU, and now here are our goals that we discussed at Virginia Tech. And so here is our process at Virginia Tech. Overall, you can see that this is the order we did during our first pilot, so that first year run. We developed a team and we identified roles first. We moved to selecting software, creating templates and scales, and then actually conducting that pilot of the English curriculum, reporting our progress, and then planning what would be next. For us, this process is really seen as very iterative. So we knew that the steps could even change for us as we move forward, or maybe even during. We wanted to be very flexible. And the results, as you'll often see in curriculum mapping literature, are really to capture a moment in time. So they're seeing like, this is what happened in this semester, or this is what we taught this one time in this one class. So it's definitely that moment in time that we're capturing here. So now moving to obtaining buy-in and funding for an initiative like we did here at Virginia Tech. So when we talk about new initiatives like this, even when they have the potential to lead to programmatic changes, one major concern for librarians is locating the funding to support work or project like this. So when we talk about finding funding sources, often when universities have top-down initiatives like we had the Beyond Boundaries here at Virginia Tech, you can make use of one-time funds. So for us, this took the form of both grant funding through the libraries as well as departmental one-time funds for strategic initiatives. But on the slide that I have on your screen, you can see other ideas for funding opportunities that may be available for you at your home institutions to support projects like this. So looking at teaching and learning center funding, new faculty incentive funding, new initiative funding, or even external funding sources such as state funding for libraries are all really good places to look to start thinking about how can I financially support or even start thinking about offering a curriculum mapping program like this. So now we're moving to developing and conducting a pilot. So when we first decided that we would embark on a curriculum mapping project, we knew that this was something that we would need a team for, a team that could create the framework that would be scalable and easy for liaisons to learn. We also knew that it had to be something that would produce results, that would connect to those primary and secondary outcomes that were laid out by the previous provost, but that could be communicated in a way that was simple and concise and easy to understand, and also in a way that was exciting for other people maybe to get involved. Our first steps were really to define roles and to figure out who should be a part of this team. So looking at our project, we decided initially that we wanted to have 3 roles: the curriculum mapping expert, the subject liaison, and the grant administrator. In addition to this team, we also ended up hiring some student workers to assist And more of like the data entry aspects, those things that they could really do a lot of research and fill in for, we thought would definitely be a good way to take advantage of student workers and kind of allow them to kind of see how we investigate the curriculum. So as moving to developing the team and kind of talking about those roles more, Stephanie, the director who we mentioned earlier, really served as the administrator in this role. And she drafted a 2-year plan for roles and expectations that would serve as a guide for our team. She also developed 3 goals for the first year of the mapping process. She decided on the primary goal to create needed content that would be identified through curriculum mapping. The secondary goal, to identify student learning outcomes, or SLOs, in other areas for information literacy program development. And the tertiary goal, to identify how to scale this into a curriculum mapping program for year 2. I served in that second role that you can see on your screen, the curriculum mapping expert role. And this is really seen as more of an operational role. And the reason why I received this role was really because of my previous experience with curriculum mapping, and she felt like it would be easier to kind of have my support and experience to kind of go through this new program together. My role really was on the idea of thinking about theory to practice. So thinking about on the ground level, what does it look like to actually deploy a program like this? I would report the materials that we needed or maybe support that we needed. It was my role to start creating the frameworks and the templates for mapping and to start collaborating with subject liaisons or other team members who might want to help in converting those templates into data visualizations. And then also work with other team members analyzing the results of the visualizations in the project as a whole. The last position that you can see there is the subject liaison role. My colleague Julia Farrar served in this role. At the time, she was the liaison to the Department of English, so she was also the person that coordinated our first year instruction. And we do a lot of foundational instruction on my team, so a lot of the instruction would be run through her. So she already had close relationships with the English department, and as a team, we were all really familiar with the kind of instruction and support that they might need. She's currently in a new role, the head of digital literacy, and so I'll talk about how curriculum mapping is continuing to be a part of the work that she does, and we're excited that she's always happy to be involved with this. As a subject liaison on the team, it was really her role to communicate with faculty, the English department, to gather syllabi and other materials needed for mapping, and to work with me to put this information into templates and to collaborate with other team members to analyze those results. As a liaison, she also really worked to imagine what the future liaison's involvement in this project might be. So like, how was her experience working with me? How was her time commitment? What would that look like, in the future? So we're really being strategic here, thinking about, what were we asking liaisons to do with this work? So weighing the cost and the benefits of the request is something that we found to be really important, especially in the pilot stages. I think one of the advantages of having Julia in the department and also doing this work is that because we were starting with her role and because we did a lot of foundational instruction, she had a lot of buy-in already because this project was housed on the team. So we had to keep in mind, what would this be like for a liaison who was not on our team? Because we do have liaisons in the library that work in various departments. So it's not like all of us are in teaching and learning engagement. My screen is spinning, so I'm trying to get to the next slide.
Well, while it's loading, would you be willing to share your templates and scales with your audience?
Absolutely. Yeah, I have some screenshots in here, but if that would be helpful, what I could do is I have a lot of them actually in Google Drive. So I'll get to the software selection next, and I could easily create a folder that has those materials in it. And then the audience members could actually have access to kind of see what I did, make copies and adjustments to it.
Oh, that would be great. Thank you.
We are on 14. There we go. It looks like I've got it back to working. Okay, so now we're moving to software selection. So our goal of thinking about software selection, as you might already know from this last question, was to think about something that would be as easy as possible, if not something that our liaisons were already familiar with. We didn't want to create any barriers between the project and the liaisons. So the team began exploring software options in the fall of 2016, with one of the demos taking place actually before I even started working at Virginia Tech. I was familiar with some software, so I really had experience with TaskStream from my previous job, as well as using Excel for templates. So when I came here, we demoed Chalk.com, CurricMap, and Atlas. Very generally speaking, many of these seemed more appropriate for K-12 schools or academic departments rather than libraries, even though many of them said that they were being used in school media centers. So perhaps these could be very useful for information literacy instruction programming, but maybe not as useful for the larger scale vision that we had in our dreams when we were thinking about this curriculum mapping project. In terms of visualizations, I do have some examples of screenshots of things that we looked at on the slide, but many of the mapping tools were creating coded or colored templates that illustrated how a curriculum was scaffolded to highlight those redundancies or opportunities. So really just kind of seeing the templates themselves in a color-coded way. We really wanted more robust visualizations, so we saw the coded template really for us as a starting point, but we definitely didn't want it to be the final product. So instead, we ended up selecting Tableau as our tool for visualizations and Google Sheets as our tool for templates. We felt that this combination really allowed for full functionality as well as scaling options for moving forward with the project. Google Sheets made a lot of sense for us because we're a Google school. All of our liaisons have already been using Google. They've been using Google Sheets. So there was no worry about someone not having the software or not having the experience using it already. In terms of Tableau, we really chose that because we have a data visualization team here on campus in the libraries to work with us. And so the ability to think about what it is that we wanted to show in the data and then really think about how we wanted that to look. So instead of selecting a software that produces, like this type of visualization for us, we can decide what we want our visualizations to look like, how they'll look, how they'll function, and we really found having the ability to design these visualizations exactly as we wanted empowering for us. So for us, Tableau really made a lot of sense. Okay, so now we're kind of getting to the template portion of the presentation where you can see what was it that we were actually doing. So the first thing that we did was create this program overview template, and I have the word snippet there because it's definitely not the whole template, but I wanted you to get an idea for the look and feel of what this looks like. So again, we see this template being used as that first step in the mapping process. We see it as providing structure for analyzing the curriculum. Liaisons can mark where they're already doing instruction and where there's potential for engagement. This is really how the liaison will select which classes that they want to explore further in that next step of the mapping process. This entry point into mapping is specifically where I started with what I learned from Barbara Tierney when I was working at LSU. As part of my job as that QEP liaison, I led liaison training sessions on mapping, and Barbara came to campus, like I mentioned earlier, to kind of show us her approach and inform us of her scholarship and share with us her templates, which she has all in a LibGuide. And so what you can see if you are familiar at all with her templates is that some of the foundation of her approach really is visible here. So Barbara has the course number and the course name listed. She also has that option where you see required course. She has required and elective there, as well as, I think the language is slightly different, but as well as that library engagement. Is it something we're involved in addition to the research assignment? So what we did is thinking about that and then having more thoughts about, what does this look like at Virginia Tech? What campus initiatives or programs do we have here that we want to make sure the liaisons have a chance to think about when they're making decisions on mapping further. And so what we added in here, which you can see near the end, we have digital literacy here, we have use of a special space, we have create an e-portfolio. So that is our way to start thinking about those ongoing campus initiatives and give the liaison an idea that, like, oh, maybe I really only want to map courses in depth that are going to incorporate ePortfolio or might have the potential to. Or maybe the liaison only wants to look at courses in depth that offer digital literacy as a component. So then we move to crafting outcome areas from the frames. So after we started doing that first template, we're starting to move now to thinking about how to develop that second template. So to do that, we have outcome areas that we created in order to kind of think about what would govern the information literacy template. So to do that, we carefully considered the frames first, and we created 4 outcome areas that you can see on your screen: reflective discovery, critical evaluation, ethics, and creation and scholarship. And so if you look next to those, you'll see ACRL frames. So with reflective discovery, you see that we mention research as inquiry, searching as strategic exploration, scholarship as conversation. If you look at the next template outcome area, you see critical evaluation. And the frames you see there are scholarship as conversation, authority as constructed and contextual. So what you're really seeing is that we see that multiple outcome areas might be connected to, multiple frames might be connected in different ways throughout the different outcome areas. We don't really think that it's a problem to have the frame mentioned more than once in an outcome area or seeing that connection, because we realize that in instruction sessions, you might cover more than one concept or skill, and you might cover it at varying depths. So recognizing that there's some, overlap, we think is totally fine and maybe even a good thing in terms of varied instruction. Now we're starting to think about developing outcomes for each area. So this is really starting to think about developing that information literacy template a little bit more. So you're starting to see the beginnings of that. So once the outcome areas were developed, we continued reviewing the framework and crafting outcomes for each area. The goal was really to create a structure for the liaisons to map courses of their choice in depth, which would highlight for them skills, concepts, outcomes that they were covering when they were engaging with students in those particular classes. The challenge, of course, is that the framework was a little bit more conceptual and theoretical, so we did need to generate some of the outcomes based on the frames. The slide here shows examples of the outcomes we developed for 2 of the outcome areas. So again, it's not the entire list of outcome areas. We see reflective discovery and critical evaluation here. So if we look at reflective discovery on your screen, we'll see some of those outcomes. We'll see develop research questions or revise topic scope continually. And we think this really makes a lot of sense, especially the topic scope there, because as students work through revising their topic scope, they're going to touch on skill development related to this area and maybe finding sources, so you see maybe overlap that if you're doing topic scope, you might also do generate keywords, you might also do search strategies. So you might do multiple of those, again, in one session. So now moving to considering general education indicators. So this is, again, thinking about how do we relate the instruction that we're doing, starting to do this mapping, to thinking about our general education curriculum, again, known as pathways here. So instead of framing information literacy as its area, the pathways general education curriculum includes information literacy related concepts and skills, but the language is different. So really what we're talking about is very similar skills. We can see where that outcome area, where the frame, and where the general education indicators all align. It's just that the language they're using is slightly different. So while pathways indicators use that different language, we were able to kind of create a chart to show connections between those indicators and those outcomes. So when mapped, the team will know exactly which information literacy outcomes are covered in each pathways course that receives library instruction. So if you look at reflective discovery again, you can see those 3 frames that we mentioned: research as inquiry, searching as strategic exploration, and scholarship as conversation. And that language that they use in the pathways indicators or the gen ed indicators say discover and comprehend information from a variety of sources. So discover and comprehend information reflective discovery, really thinking about that concept of being able to, locate information, think about our topic, and continually reflectively revise that. So that's where we see the alignment in that particular outcome. Moving to the information literacy template snippet. So this is, again, just a snippet, but this is really the template that we had liaisons using. And this is where they were able, again, to identify from the program overview which ones that they wanted to map more closely, and then they would use these templates as that second stage or that more in-depth mapping. So we drafted full outcomes for the liaisons, but the template itself, we decided and purposefully decided to pare it down. So we removed the verbs and other excess words in the SLOs. The goal here is to give the template an easy, not overwhelming, not text-heavy appearance. Also, we found it valuable not to assume a particular verb. So we're thinking about Bloom's taxonomy here. It really gives the librarian flexibility in the level of depth of coverage for each one. So you see here that instead of revise topic scope continuously under reflective discovery, we see topic scope. Instead of the word generate keywords, we just see keywords. So it allows that librarian to decide how in depth they're going to cover that skill and then be able to document that. Now we're moving to the spaces template, and this template is the third part of the mapping process. And really thinking about the concepts and skills involved in library instruction, it's also important to think about, well, do you have unique spaces that maybe the instruction should take place in, or maybe it's not exactly instruction, but something else that you need. So thinking about this spaceless template, we're thinking here about classrooms, studios, exhibits. We have exhibits here in the library, special collections, and even spaces that don't exist yet, and in some ways have now exist but didn't quite exist when we made this template the first time. So under each space name, there's potential uses of the space listed. This will provide the team with data on the actual usage of the space. What you can't see on this template, because I cut it out just to give you a snippet of the feel, is that under each section, so where you see multi-purpose room, we have those 3 ways: class presentations, poster sessions, other events, thinking those were the ways the room would be used. But then there are also blank spaces. So if the room is used for something unique, something other than that, there's room for the liaison to document that. And then we realize, like, oh, this is another great way that this room could be used. Or maybe, if we had a different space or a different room or a different technology, we could have accommodated this class better. So it just kind of helps us to know what's really going on. And I think this just gives the team more insight to space usage overall. The data collected here, I think, will also help other library faculty and staff to make informed decisions about space development and to design programs that are really fitting for specific classes, co-curricular events, or even engagement opportunities. I think as we continue drafting this template, I really see us working heavily with another department in the library known as learning environments, because many of the spaces fall in that department. So this really is a draft of this. We haven't actually utilized this template yet. So I think as we continue drafting it, like I said, we'll work really closely with them to think about, what would they like to see in this template? Are things missing? So now we're moving into a few more snippets, but this is the undergraduate English program snippet. So this gives you an idea of what a completed program overview template looks like for the undergraduate English program. I worked really closely again with Julia Farrar to really map this program, and we analyzed material like syllabi and past instruction sessions, in addition to the knowledge that she had about the department. So because she had been working with them and doing instruction, she already had a lot of knowledge that might not even appear in the documents that we investigated. And then you can see next the modeling engagement with English. So after kind of doing the mapping, Julia decided to model a student's journey using Lucidchart, which is available through Google as an add-on if that is something, if your school has Google. So here what we can do is we can see the tracing of a path for a student that takes these majors through their programs. This is all 3 of the undergraduate majors together, so it's a little bit hard to see since all 3 are there. So in a moment we're going to look just at one of the majors. But what is visible here, and the reason why I definitely wanted to show this, is that you can see the foundational instruction. So first year experience, first year writing, and introductory methods course. courses. You can also see where those intermediate courses, electives, and capstones come into play for students. As noted on the bottom, you can see that the courses that are highlighted in yellow have had library instruction in the recent past. That could have either been with Julia as their liaison or in the special collections library. So we counted either one as having library instruction. Next, you can see the modeling engagement via track again, and this is where I said we were going to hone into one track. So we're looking here at English, language, and literature as a major. And so through that initial mapping, we kind of know more about these courses. So you'll see that those in blue contain a research assignment, and the ones in purple actually contain a creative and or digital project. So as their liaison, Julie was really excited to kind of think of ways that she would be able to expand her engagement, whether that was through instruction, consultation, maybe it's online support, maybe it's something else that she hasn't thought about. But she was really particularly interested in the writing and digital media courses because she knew at the time that she was going to be moving into the role as head of digital literacy. So the mapping already helped her not only in the role of an English liaison, but now as this person that's going to be heading a new initiative to think about, oh, well, there's already a class in the curriculum that aligns with this new initiative. I should reach out to that faculty member and start thinking about how can we work on something together? What kind of support could I give you for this? Or maybe what can you tell me about the work that you've been doing that will maybe frame how I'm thinking about this new initiative? So now we're moving to another snippet. This is the undergraduate English information literacy snippet. So this is that second layer of mapping. And so what you can see is that this has been completed and that there's a scale that's visible in the top right hand of your screen. That scale is an outcome scale that really follows traditional methods for mapping. You can see introduce is a 1, reinforce is a 2, masters is 3. So that's thinking about what level the student is after the instruction that we give them. Again, this is pretty common. I think it aligns with traditional ways that curriculum mapping is often done, is having a scale like that. We had piloted another scale that we thought was super awesome in the beginning stages that really used Bloom's taxonomy and thinking about verbs. And then we realized that it really blurred lines and made it way more confusing. So that's why we went back to this traditional sense. To explain a little bit what you're looking at on your screen, if you look under English 3684, and that's literature and the law, you'll see a 1 there under search tools and resources. That 1 would mean that Julia introduced the concept, but maybe didn't go in depth. If you look over to English 3744 for writing center theory and practice, you see a 2. So what that would mean is the 2 is for keywords. So that would mean that she reinforced this concept that students already were exposed to it in previous instruction, so she went a little bit more in depth. If you would see a 3 on here, that would denote, again, student mastery. We don't often get to see that in the library, at least in our foundational instruction or even undergraduate instruction, because oftentimes we don't see end products. We see students at beginning stages. So that's why we see 3s far less when we curriculum map, but that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be there or that it's not useful or that it's not something that maybe we should work towards. I think one of the main challenges that Julia faced when she was thinking through how to address courses with multiple sections that might do different things. So like what would that look like if you taught 2 sections of 3744 and they had, very different, final projects and very different research skills? What does that look like when you map it? Would it make sense? So thinking about how we're going to address that moving forward is something that's definitely on our minds. She also had in mind that some of those seminars go to special collections. So depending on their theme, which could change year to year, maybe one year she would do the instruction, maybe one year one of our special collections librarians would do it. And again, we're not seeing that level of granularity in the maps to kind of tell us that that's taking place. So those are other things that we have to think about as we're making these screenshots and doing this work, is maybe does special collections need to be separated in some way so that we know when a request comes in that we definitely want to filter it that direction, or maybe we want to collaborate with them on something special. So now we're going to move to a bubble chart, which shows us some outcomes taught. So after the initial mapping, Julia and I together worked really closely with one of our colleagues to visualize some of this data using Tableau. Because we used a numeric scale, we were able to calculate scores for each course and for each outcome taught across multiple courses. A higher score would mean that that outcome is addressed multiple times and or at a deeper level. So when we look at this bubble chart here, it represents the frequency and depth of each outcome taught in relation to each other. What we realized though is it was pretty hard to kind of see and understand, like, you know, is search tools and resources, if I'm just looking at the bubble chart, bigger than conversations surrounding a topic or idea? Is it slightly smaller? Is it the same size? So we realized that this might not be the most useful way with the amount of data we have right now. So recognizing that we have less data now than we would have if we did all of the university, that, you know, this is just from the pilot. So we decided to keep working on visualizing it in different ways. So here was something else that we did. We did categories taught, and this has a bubble chart versus a bar chart. So you can kind of see, well, what does it look like if we use a bar chart? So basically what you're seeing here is we collapsed our outcomes into broad outcome areas that we had identified. And reflective discovery was covered the most, and creation and scholarship wasn't covered at all, which makes a lot of sense for foundational English instruction. So that's why when you look on the left, there's not a bubble at all for creation and scholarship, because we didn't see it appear. If you look on the right, you can actually see some of those aggregate scores. So you see reflective discovery is at 28, and you see critical evaluation is at 9. So in some instances, having that count there, having that score there, we felt like was a little bit more useful for us, because then we were able to see like just how much bigger or more covered was reflective discovery than ethics. And maybe, you know, if we talk to the English department, maybe ethics is a big concern and it's assigned to us that we need to cover that more, which is very clear from the stats that would line up to be a true statement. The last visualization I have here to show you today is a tree map, and this really covers outcomes by class. So here what you can see are outcomes for each class, with the goal of having this visualization being to kind of explore which outcomes fell in under each class, looking kind of at all the classes that we did for English together, or most of the classes I should say. So if we were again mapping, you know, a whole college or something, this might not be the best way, but for a pilot, I think it allowed us just to kind of see, you know, what we were able to do with this and what it would look like in a different way. So after the pilot, which ended last spring, I took the lead on moving forward with year 2. So thinking about, okay, we've done this pilot, how do we start mapping the university and what does that look like? So here's an image of the work that we completed in the fall semester of this year. So I hired 2 students, and they created folders for every college at the university, and completed program overview templates, so that first level mapping for every single major at the university. As we were going through this work, it became very, very clear that moving forward like we did for English was going to place a huge burden on liaisons. We also recognized how time intensive it was going to be, and we started thinking about the change of pace at Virginia Tech, the idea of pathways, curriculum, and how students would actually be walking through it. We felt for both of those reasons, asking the liaisons to do this and thinking about the time commitment, we didn't think that it was actually going to be the best approach moving forward. So we started thinking about, well, how do we want to report our progress? And then how do we want to think about making changes? What does it look like moving forward for us here? So we think about reporting progress and communicating those results. We are currently working on reporting progress right now. So everyone who received Beyond Boundaries grants in the library will be presenting in front of the dean and the entire library during one of the monthly forums at university libraries over the spring and the summer. So some presentations have already taken place. As a reminder, Beyond Boundaries was one of the grants that funded us for this project. So the purpose of these presentations is really to show the entire library what we were able to produce with the special funds, and then also to create buy-in for future partners. So maybe there are liaisons that will see this work and be like, oh, I definitely want to be, you know, involved as you move forward and map more. So I think it will not only hopefully generate excitement, but also show people really how much we learned. So thinking more clearly on reporting progress, we began drafting our report for the forum presentation, and the content will in many ways be an abbreviated version of what you're seeing in today's presentation, with our goal of highlighting the big things. You know, what our project grant application was for, what is curriculum mapping, what our goals were for the project, and then a summary of year 1 and year 2 to date, and then the findings, the challenges, and the next steps. For informing colleagues, forums are great, but I'm sure a lot of you are thinking about, and what I have the slide on is thinking about, well, what if you're thinking about talking to someone externally, someone not in your library, not your colleague? So we think other ways to really showcase what we've done is thinking about being concise. So using one-pagers, being able to show the data and the impact, that's really probably what funding bodies, administrators are looking for. So being able to do that very concisely makes a lot of sense. In terms of visualizations, I think it really helps when you're advocating for new positions to be able to show this is the work we're currently doing, but this is what we could do if we had additional instruction librarians. So I think when I mentioned my position earlier, that's really where we start seeing things that are, you know, maybe we need a new position or maybe we need to re-envision something. That helps. This also allows for us to be specific. So not only do we need an instruction librarian, but we need a librarian with expertise in this particular area to fill this gap, as you can see in this data. So ultimately, being able to report on progress, I think, is just going to aid in future requests for anyone that's doing research like this. So now we're moving to using results to develop a sustainable instruction program. So I think what's really visible from our experience is that sustainability is always a concern. So once we moved from mapping English to mapping the university, it was really clear that it wasn't sustainable. However, it can be exciting to think creatively and figure out how to make a project like this work. So building an instruction culture is one of the ways to do that. So thinking about building that instruction culture, there are a few things that you can do. Number one, make sure that you capitalize on those campus initiatives, because administrative report is really vital to getting any kind of funding, any kind of support and success. So I think it's totally fine to range the instruction that you offer from high impact to general, but just really capitalizing on those initiatives will help. Thinking about scaling options. So where does it make sense to do online versus flipped versus hybrid versus face-to-face instruction? And what would it take for you to be able to move or make decisions to move certain things online? And lastly, identifying areas where your instruction program is working really, really well. So who are your strongest partners? What partners do you think you should be working with that you're not? Where are those opportunities that you can seize? And then thinking about if things need to be change, how are you going to communicate that so people don't feel like the work that they've done isn't valuable or isn't necessary, but instead really getting people excited about that change? And then what things need to stay the same, because a lot of the instruction that we do is really great. So as the saying is, don't fix what isn't broken. So thinking about our next steps, they're really going to affect three areas: our team structure, our approach, and how we think about or discuss our takeaways. So for next steps, I think one of the largest engagement opportunities we found from a mapping opportunity was engaging with high impact practices on campus. So this is an example of us using mapping data to hone in on campus initiatives that is generating a lot of speed. To do this, we're really making a shift in our decisions moving forward to map from mapping subject areas to mapping high impact practices. And again, this makes sense because of the campus conversation, and we're looking at experiences rather than functions, looking at campus initiatives, and really thinking outside of the curriculum. This is going to allow us to have more flexibility in terms of aligning ourselves with new initiatives and with the aforementioned Pathways General Education curriculum that could allow students to progress through their minors in different ways. And lastly, the next steps will also allow us to consider what we're doing now versus what we want to be doing. We can explore what needs to stay the same, because obviously many things about our current approach in instruction, again, really do work. And then thinking about, again, what partners or changes do we need to make or additions that we need to make. One more thing that I have at the bottom of this, another unique outcome came from this, was the beginnings of what is now our digital literacy framework. So you'll see a lot of overlap from our outcome areas into this framework. So I put a link there in case anyone was interested in exploring that and looking at it after today. So we move to structuring a team for sustainability. We're going to be doing a couple of things. Number one, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to step into a new role as high impact practice librarian, serving as a liaison to the Office of Undergraduate Research, the Honors College, and some select living learning communities. We're going to have another high impact practice librarian position. It was just recently posted, so many of you may have seen it. And that person is going to really start thinking about first year experiences, some of the other living learning communities, maybe something like study abroad. I think there's a lot of flexibility for us to operationalize these roles and really kind of hone and see what makes sense as we start this mapping process. So some key takeaways that I have for you is I think many of our key takeaways really are thinking about focusing on experiences. So rather than looking so closely at the curriculum, think outside of the curriculum. This approach helps us to stay involved with the changes on campus here so that we remain in stride with the university instead of playing catch up. And I think it will also help to identify where we might look to engage with new partners. So I'm going to move to the question portion. So hopefully you guys have some great questions, and I'll try my best to answer them. And again, Stephanie Metco is able to answer them for you if there's something that comes up that I'm not able to answer. But I'll move the slide to references in case people had questions of some of the references that I had mentioned.
Thank you. We have had a few questions come in. First, can you give some examples of redundancies you noticed in your instruction? You know, what is a redundancy and what is necessary repetition? And how did you determine which was which?
Sure. The easiest way that we saw it, so again, my department, teaching and learning engagement, we do a ton of foundational instruction. So we work really closely with communication 1016, with English 1106. We're not so much worried about redundancy between those classes because students would often choose one or the other. So we're not worried if we see those same kind of skills being covered in similar ways. However, first year experience courses could be taken by any student who's an undergraduate. And what we realized is that oftentimes a lot of us teach the same instruction, and we would get the request and we would cover almost, I don't want to say we don't use scripts or anything like that. We do tailor each instruction session, but we would find ourselves covering the same skills, using the same handouts, and even using in some cases the same examples, because a lot of times people here will do like an innovative technology that students might explore and think about how it could change the future, something like that. So we would use the same examples. And what we realized is that doesn't really work, because then students would have FYE instruction maybe in the fall, and then in the spring they would come in and have English 1106 instruction. And there might be instances where they even have the same instruction library and giving a very similar thing. So what we would do is when we saw that the FYE in the English 1106, like I knew from experience it was happening, but when we saw that it was consistently happening across the board, then that's what alarmed us to think like, okay, so the redundancy between 1016, that comm class and English is fine because there's no overlap in students, but because FYE and English 1106 could have overlap, that's when it's not okay.
Thank you. I'm also wondering, and somebody asked this good question, how do you negotiate the different terms when you were communicating with stakeholders, like digital literacy, information literacy?
Yes, that has been an ongoing conversation. So that actually started, for me, I started experiencing that when I was at LSU. So I was working a lot with nutrition and food science. And when I was talking to some faculty, they were like, well, we don't do information literacy. But then when I looked at their own accreditation standards, I saw evidence-based practice in there. So I realized that like, oh, so there's definitely a disconnect between, you know, they're absolutely need information literacy, but they're just not using that term. So in some cases, it takes the subject liaison using the language that the department uses and getting to know the department, the literature, if it is an accredited department, what language they're using. It helps in that way. The nice thing is for the liaisons that are actually doing the mapping themselves, they are familiar with the framework. So what we tried to do is have templates that kind of show that language. So where we showed the pathways language in the general education curriculum to mapping to the information literacy frames, we tried to kind of show the similarities in the language so that the liaison didn't have to do all the investigative work. And in some ways, it seemed like a lot of our liaisons were familiar with that language and had already identified the disconnects. But like for me at LSU, I was a brand new librarian. So I didn't know and I hadn't experienced it until I started looking. So some of it is just really talking to your faculty. And then even if they say no, if you know, again, that it's accredited or something like that, you can look at the language that they use in syllabi or assignments and start reframing those discussions.
Okay, thank you. And given you showed us a map where you had ranked things 1, 2, depending on the amount of depth you went into the library instruction.
Yes.
Were you able to work with faculty to change assignments in all those places where there were ones or where nothing was listed?
We haven't started that process yet, but we've certainly been having conversations with it, and it kind of depends on the individual faculty member. So in some cases, the faculty member, like in my instance, I was working with an English instructor a few weeks ago, and she was like, my students are really struggling with this. Do you have any suggestions? So in some cases, the conversation has just opened up, and then I was able to kind of talk about, well, actually, I did notice that like in some of the other classes, I'm able to cover this, but I'm not here. So we had some conversations in that sense, but we haven't actually taken the data yet and shared it with the departments, but that is our plan.
Okay. And did you define high impact practices, or is this a concept beyond Virginia Tech?
It is definitely, yeah, it's a concept beyond Virginia Tech, but there's actually groups on campus that are working thinking about things like experiential learning and how we'll define that on campus. So there are groups of faculty members that are defining things like that for us, but we are using high impact practices based on the literature. So it's actually a thing that is defined way beyond Virginia Tech. Really what it encompasses, so if you think about like first year writing is a good example of it, living learning community. So really we're thinking about where students are engaging, as it sounds like, at a higher level. So maybe they're doing an experience like study abroad, and how does that change what they learn in the classroom and what they learn from reading and what they thought they knew? So how do these experiences have that fundamental changing impact?
And how do you quantify library engagement?
Well, are you asking like how we quantified like the 1 versus 2, or?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So what we did is we really struggled with that. So originally we were using verbiage and thinking that we were going to use Bloom's taxonomy. So where you might have something like, the difference between describe versus like analyze or apply. So we were originally thinking about doing something like that. And instead what we decided is really thinking about like the level of instruction. So like, for example, Julia has outcomes that she put together for English. And so from those outcomes, she was able to kind of think about, this is what I think, an introduction is. So if I talk to students about the concept of generating keywords, and they're able to get some basic ones, that would be a 1. So she basically mapped it out. So we're seeing that is basically looking at from what we know about instruction and from the outcomes that we have for our programs, what numbers make sense for that.
Do you think you'd be able to use this process if you were working with the department doing a curriculum change?
I think so. I don't know if you could do it, at every university, but I think you could. So when I was at LSU, I actually met that nutrition and food science department. I met with the head of the department, and then I want to say 3 faculty members and then 2 instructors. And so we actually talked to them about curriculum mapping, and they actually brought to me a map that they have. I think the conversation is easier with programs that are accredited, because the programs that are accredited often have maps of how a student walks through their program. So in some cases, it's not foreign to them at all. It's definitely something, if you were working with education, curriculum mapping is really commonly used there. Here at Virginia Tech, again, a lot of the departments are already doing curriculum mapping on their own. So when we talk about it, I think having the 1, 2, and 3 for us works, because we're seeing a lot of other units mapping in the same way. But for us, it just kind of depends on their familiarity. But it has been, in terms at LSU and working with that department, or seeing like Pathways General Education, they're doing curriculum mapping themselves. There's some curriculum mapping being done with the Office of Assessment. So it is happening in other places on campus, and we're simply mapping library instruction here and library engagement.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Amanda and Stephanie, and the members of the ACRL Instruction Sections Management and Leadership Committee. We will be sending out the link with the recording for the session as soon as possible. And do you think, Amanda, that you'll have the link to your Google Drive with the forms?
Sure. Yeah, I can get that to you today probably, if that's
Okay.
helpful.
Great, thank you. If any of you in the audience are craving more curriculum mapping support, be sure to join the ACRL Instruction Section's annual virtual program, Curriculum Mapping from Planning to Practice, on Thursday, May 31st from 12 to 1 Central. And thank you everyone for attending. Do you have anything else you would like to add, Amanda or Amanda?
I don't, but thank you so much. I've had such a great time today.
Thanks for coming on. It was so informative. I really liked it.
Awesome.
Thank you.